Cool. So folks, this is our level from last week. We had our door that we're able to open and close. We had keys we could pick up, and that would increase the key counter on our player. Okay? That's basically where we were. I asked you for like homework to try and figure out like how to get the doors finally working with the right keys. Okay, so basically the behavior we want is that this door won't open until we've a sufficient number of keys required to open it. So the first thing we're going to do, we obviously have our first person character. They have the keys variable, which is an integer. And we obviously need to like start at that point, and then we're going to build out from there. What we're going to do is we just need the doors to be able to check how many keys our player character has. And we've kind of done that a little bit before. Let me just close this card. That one actually close it. But if we go to the doors, what do I need to add to the doors? What sort of variable?
Is open, is closed.
Yeah, we'll definitely want it open and close. Boolean, I think, will be useful to have. Anything else people can think of if we want to compare the number of keys required? Yeah, we need to just store a number in that. So basically an integer. So we're going to create a new variable, and we can call this num keys required. You could also say number keys required. Hit return. It's an integer, which is what we want. If depending on what the last type of variable you created, it will give you a different option there, but set it to integer because that's what we need. Okay, so we've integer there, and we can just compile, save, make sure that's all okay. We can set a default value on this, but by default we're probably best off with 0. Because what we want is doors that require 0 keys, they're going to open automatically, and doors that require anything else, we're going to have the number of keys they require. Okay, so where do you think we're going to check to see if we have the correct number of keys required? Bridge? On the player? We can actually do it on the door. The door can check. Remember the way last week the key was able to increase the number of keys the player had in their basically in their pocket. So we were letting the keys control a variable on the player. Now we can have the door actually check a variable on the player. Does that make sense? So we're gonna have the door see, hey, how many of these keys does the player carry? Okay. So where about in this flow do you think we'd want to do that? We're going to do a check there. Every time we hit E, we're going to want to check to see if we can actually open the door. Yeah, so straight away after we press E, we're just going to want to check to see. And what are we going to want to check? We're going to want to compare, and we'll make this public. We're going to want to compare the number of keys required, which we're going to get, with, what else are we going to want? What are the two things we want to check? The number of keys we require to open this door and the number of keys that the player has. Yeah. If you remember from last week, we can go to the keys and we can say here, after we've casted this to a first person character, we're able to then get the keys variable out of that. And we add 1 to it. So if I go back to the doors, we've already casted this to a first person character here. Okay, and what we can do is if we type in keys, that's not right. Sorry, this is what I want. Sorry, it's just pin as first person character, and if I type in keys, I can either get keys or set keys. Do I want to get this variable or set it? Get it, yeah. I just want to do a comparison. How many keys is the player currently holding? What sort of comparison do you think I want to do? Equals? Is there anything I might want to do that's better than equals? Equal to or greater than, yeah. Depending, right? We might have a situation where we want the player to have exactly 2 keys to open this door. And that might be a kind of thing where you want to block the player's progress. So if they have 2 keys, they're able to open the door, they go through the door, and then if they get the next key, they basically can't backtrack anymore. Does that make sense? We then prevent them from using that door. But generally, I think greater than or equal to is like the generic use we might have. So here, after we've pressed E, we're going to search for greater than. If we turn off context sensitive, sometimes context sensitive is useful, sometimes it's the most annoying thing in the world. So here we have integer values. So integer greater than or integer greater than or equal to. Okay. So we're going to put in here if our keys are greater than or equal to the number of keys required for this door. And we're going to create a branch here. So when we press E, it's going to check to see does our target, our player, have keys that are greater than or equal to the number required for the door. If that's true, it's going to open it. If it's false, it's just not going to do anything. Does that make sense? Cool. So I'm going to hit compile and save. And now if I press play, if I walk up to this door, it shouldn't open. Oh no, it's open. Ah, why is that? Why is it opening? Exactly. So my default on this is 0. Did I compile that? Yes. Oh my god, I need to turn that off. Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong tab there. So here inside the default, I got my default angle, number of keys required. Oh, I've got that variable in twice. Sorry. So I'm just going to delete that one. I thought that was my Discord making noise. So now, number of keys required. Let's just check. This might take a second to update. I'm going to change this to 1. If I press play, hopefully this won't work. Okay, so I'm hitting E on the keyboard. It's not doing anything. I walk over here, get this key, and now if I press E, the door opens. Okay, just to prove that it's working, we'll put in another key there, press play, get 2 keys, just make sure that it still works if we have 2. Cool. Door still opens and works the way we want it to. Does that make sense? Okay, and the other thing we might want to check is we might want to just create a door. Let's create a door that requires 0 keys and a door that requires, let's say, 2 keys. Okay, and this is just a test to make sure our script is working. Okay, can we open that door? Yeah, that's 0 keys. We don't have any keys. The one that requires 2 keys won't open. The one that requires 1 key won't open. We pick up 1 key. The one for 2 keys doesn't open. This one should. And then once we get this key, we should now have access to this room as well. Cool. And this one should keep opening. Does that make sense? Okay, we created a fairly straightforward system that allows us to have like lockable doors with keys, basically. If we want these things that specific keys open specific doors, we might instead have like that integer value might be, we'd want to do it equals, because we'd have maybe this key requires you to have a key number 6 or something like that. Okay? That makes sense? But we've got a general system there that kind of like allows us to open up doors and stuff like that. So the other thing we're going to look at today beyond kind of finishing that part of the homework is looking at some of the lighting stuff in a little bit more detail to try and get a little bit nicer lighting in our levels and a little bit more control over some of the variables involved. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start manipulating some of this stuff and create a small room basically. Cool. So we've got an area here. Just go check to see can the player walk up. Nice. Okay, cool. So the player can walk under there. We might need to move this up. Make sure that's in contact. Will that work? Will it still explode off? No. Okay, cool. So that should be that completely blocked off pretty much. Cool. Can I knock the roof down? I think I should in theory be able to knock the roof down, but it's pretty tough. No. I'm just not able to run at it quick enough. Cool. So that basically gives us a little. All I want there basically is a space that's quite dark so that we can like light it up a bit. Yeah, just something simple that lets us put a bit of lighting in there and kind of see how it's going to work in that space. We'll probably create a few other little spaces today to test lighting in. One thing actually I want to delete off my player is this. Cool. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a light. Have people played the Souls games like Dark Souls and stuff like that? Okay. There's a lot of games that do this, but does anyone know what happens in like a Souls game if you like go into a corner between a couple of walls? What do you start to see? Which? Anyone know? Okay. There's a slight light on your player, yeah, just so that the world, that even though it's quite a dark world, it gives you a little bit of light to the world, basically. Okay, so that's what we're gonna do. We're actually going to create a light, and we're going to set it up so that it's on a trigger volume that we can create and place in different areas. And once you walk inside that trigger volume, it's going to turn on or off your player light. Okay, so that's like having. So should we do this as a flashlight instead of like a? We can either do it as a point light, so that it's like all a glowing orb around the player, or as a flashlight, so that it's like they have a flashlight for walking through a dark space. We do the flashlight? Yeah, cool. I think that probably, for the type games we're talking about, that probably works a bit better. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the player and the viewport. I'm going to add component, and I'm going to search for spot, and spotlight's going to be there. That's pointing in the right direction. Cool. Let's hit save, and let's see what this looks like now in our game. Cool. That actually works pretty well by default. Okay, but like, you know, the one thing we might want is like constantly rendering this light. The other thing I'm going to do with that point light, I don't know if I mentioned this to you in game tools before, but whenever you're creating a light, try and make sure it's not like perfect white. Generally, like, we think of light as being white, but it's very rare we actually get like perfect bright white light. So like if you look at these, they're actually kind of like orangish. Most bulbs are. Some LEDs are like fairly close to like brilliant white, but even brilliant white is like almost has a slight bluishness to it. But let's go for a gonna go for this sort of color here, maybe. Something like that. For my light color. Just again to take away from your pure brilliant white, which often looks like a little bit fake or a little bit unrealistic. And we can see what that looks like in the game again by pressing play. And now that kind of lights up our level. It again looks a little bit more realistic there. So that's our point light set up on our player character. we are going to create a variable here on our player, and I'm going to call it is flashlight on. Okay? This is just going to be a variable that tells us whether our flashlight is turned on or off. Okay? And that's going to be public. Type is going to be Boolean. Okay, so we'll probably, by default, we'll start the game with this off. Obviously, you probably know yourself, it wouldn't be too hard to change this to have it change to whether being on or off at the start of your level, depending on where it is. So, so that is if you create this. So, folks, there's a question there that Jadviga had. I hope I pronounced that reasonably well, or very poorly. But basically, the question is, where is it here? Expose on spawn. And that means if you spawn this, if you create an instance of this from another game object, do you want this to be a variable pane that you can change when it's spawned? Okay, does that make sense? If you're spawning player characters and you want to be able to change whether the light is on or off. Okay, so it's kind of like it's when it spawns, basically you just have control over whether it's changed or not. Cool. So that's that. We're going to jump to event graph. And what we're going to do inside here, we're going to do something new inside here. We're going to create a custom function. Okay, and you can see here we have a custom function. Every blueprint is going to have a construction script, which is what the blueprint does when it's first created. But if I go to functions here and I create a function, and I click on this, I'm going to call this toggle flashlight. Oh. Cool. Okay, so this function is called toggle flashlight, and what I'm going to want this to do is toggle my flashlight on or off depending on the status of whether I have it turned on or off. So the first thing I'm going to do coming off of this, I'm going to do a branch. And I'm going to check to see, is my flashlight on or off? Okay, so this toggle flashlight function, whenever this is called, it's going to say, is my flashlight on or off? And it's going to do something different depending on whether it's on or off. So the first thing is, if it is on, we are then going to set actually, the easiest thing to do is grab is flashlight on, and we're going to set its value. And we're going to do the same, is flashlight on if it's false. Okay, so if flashlight is turned on, when we toggle the flashlight on, what should we now set the value to? Off, yeah. So if flashlight is on is true, then we want to change the value to false. If flashlight is off, so if flashlight is on is false, we want to change it to true. Okay, so we just need to make sure we've got a tick in this checkbox here. Okay, and next thing we're going to do is we can set visibility. And once we start typing that, it's going to give us like our suggestions here. So we're going to set visibility of spotlight. And we're going to set the new visibility to whatever this is. Okay, and then we're going to do the same here. Actually, we could just duplicate this by hitting Control C, Control V. Okay. Okay. Cool. So basically, this script here is going to just turn on or off the visibility of our spotlight, whether it's previously on or off. Does that make sense? It's just a switch, basically. Now, if I click on this toggle flashlight, I'm gonna save and compile. So access specifier here, this can be public, protected, or private. We're going to leave this as public so that we can change this value from our new blueprint. Okay, so we're going to be able to call this function from different game methods. Okay, so what we want here is that we can create all these areas where we're going to turn on the player's flashlight automatically. Okay, the other thing we can do just to test if this works is, let me see if this will work. Let's hit spacebar. If it's pressed, we're gonna toggle flashlight. Okay, and this is just going to be our test, or like we might want this just to be a mechanic in our game. Let's save. I'm gonna press play. Oh, spacebar makes me jump, but okay, but we have that working. Okay. The one thing we have at the moment is we're starting with the flashlight turned on, so we're having to press the key twice. So if we want we can do either of two things. We can either say that variable starts as true by default, and that should solve that issue. And once I press space once, it turns off. Okay, the other way to change that is to, in the construction script, of the player, we can just do toggle flashlight. Okay, and it's just going to make sure the flashlight matches what the current setting is. And then if we compile, it should work. And now it turns on when we press space, off we go. Okay, either one of those, we can either change it in the construction script, which is like our start function inside Unity, or else we can change it by setting the value defaults. Okay, cool. So that's how we have a flashlight. It's turning on and off. We've some control over it, but what we want is just to do, you know the way some games like you don't? Look, I would generally say if you're designing a game, it's better give the player control over it. Like let them pick when they turn on and off the flashlight. But at the same time, we can set up an automated blueprint pretty easily. Actor type, we're going to call this dark volume. Double click it to open. I'm going to add a box collision. So we'll be able to, I'm just going to make this fairly big to start, but we'll be able to tweak this basically. So let's go into event graph. With the box selected, folks, we can go for on component begin overlap. Okay. From this, we can do cast to first person character. It's going to take the other actor, cast it to that. As first person character, we can type in here, let's call that toggle flashlight. Okay, because this is a public function, we can call it there. Okay, so now once we overlap with this box that I've called W by mistake, we can cast it to a character and toggle the flashlight on or off. And the same end overlap, pretty much the same thing. Cast to first person character. Hooking it up pretty much the same way. Toggle flashlight. Save, compile. And now I should be able to, if I drop this volume inside here, I'm going to just try and make this pretty much the size of this area. Something like that should be fine. And then if I press play, once I walk inside here, my flashlight comes on automatically, basically. Now, I still have the space key working so that I can jump and use my flashlight. But it will now toggle it as I walk in or out of the space. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's basically just toggling that value as we move in or out of the light. Is that okay? Cool. So that gives us some control over lighting. One thing I want to highlight here as we now jump in to talk a little bit more about lighting in particular is if I select the spotlight, right, it's called movable there. Under its transform, it says it's a movable type. What do you think that means? Does anyone want to guess? You can read the tool there. Move. Yeah, so it can move, right? Now, what about stationary? Stationary can move a bit. And static. Static is basically a light that absolutely can't move. This is all more so about what's happening in the background, the way the engine is rendering out the lighting. If you set something as a static light, it's going to be baked into the light map when you build your game. Okay? It's going to give you really high shadows, really high quality lighting. It's going to look pretty great. Okay? If you set something to movable, it's going to be able to move around. Like in this case, this has to be movable. It's moving with the player. It's going to generate all those shadows and lights at one time. Okay? What you're going to have is the quality of shadows won't be quite as good, but they'll be real time and probably won't see the detail quite as much. The stationary tries to be for like lights that might move a little bit. It tries to be a little bit of an in-between both, so you get some baked lighting and then it'll move off the baked lighting if that light needs to move for any reason. Okay? So why wouldn't we just make everything a movable light? So that everything's dynamic and all our lights can change and move and stuff. Yeah. So the processing power of this basically is, I'll show the issue with this actually in a second. So I'm going to throw a couple of point lights inside here. And I'm going to make them all movable. Actually, it'll handle movable. Let me just, sorry. Set them all stationary. Okay. Anyone know what's happened there? Yeah. With too much like light information, basically, it would be too resource intensive. So what it said is like, well, I'm going to go to calculate light from this, and this, and like it's just trying to guess which lights are furthest away from each other, basically. So if we set them to static, it will now let us bake all this lighting into the level. Okay, so it'll allow us to bake this lighting. So I'm going to hit build here. Instead of hitting the build button, I'm going to hit just build lighting only. And you'll see it's going to, this might take, you'll see the status down here of how long this is going to take. Depending on how many bounces and stuff we have, this might take a bit longer. Oh no, it's pretty quick. Still on 90. Sometimes it does the first bit very quick. Or sorry, the first bit's really slow, then the middle bit's quick, and then the end is slow again. Okay, and you see first it's going to probably strip back some of the lighting info, and then if we give it a second, it'll probably add it back in. What does the rest of the level look like? Okay, cool. There we go. I like the look of those wireframes. So now if we press play, I walk inside here. Okay, I've got this nice, like, kind of, the lighting is quite, like, nice and smooth inside here. Okay, it's got some nice bounces and stuff like that. One of the problems is, as I knock that wall off, hold on. Some of the lighting information in there is stuck on the way it was rendered, basically. So it won't necessarily, because they're like static lights, it won't necessarily pick up the new lighting situation. It won't adjust those lights and the way they're generating their map. Yeah. I don't think so. No. I'm pretty sure they won't because I think like they're like baked into the level basically. Stationary lights would, so they have that kind of a slightly dynamic element to them. In the first person game, obviously you generally don't have much of a shadow on there. Sometimes you do, I suppose. But yeah, that's that static. They're all set aside. That's why I can render all of those at the same time. So the next thing I'm going to do is delete out the what lights do I have here? Okay, so can anyone tell what's happening? Why is it still lit inside there? Yeah. So my light map is based on like the lights that were there. Until I rebuild the lighting, it's going to show the previous lighting that was in place there. Okay. And yeah, we can knock that out. And we're basically getting like that original lighting information and data that was there. Okay, so now that I've deleted that stuff out, if I hit build lighting only, this should make it pretty much, I think, other than the player's flashlight, pretty much completely dark level. Okay, so now that the lighting is built, this is still picking up the reflection. Oh no, I picked it up. But I can jump and use my flashlight to try and find. In through here. Oh. Okay. So by default, folks, there's no like ambient lighting or stuff that like that built into your level. If we want to add ambient lighting, right, the way we do that is we can drag in a skylight. Okay, and that's going to give us ambient level lighting. At the minute, it's probably a bit too bright. The way this works, it's like a directional light. It can go anywhere in the level, and it picks up the lighting in the sky. So because the sky doesn't have anything like a directional light being the sun, it's got the slightly purplish hue to it. We can, if we want, like do this to like real time capture, and it'll try and pick up the background in real time. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, it just says it requires a sky atmosphere component, a volumetric cloud component, or a mesh with a material tagged as is sky. Otherwise, it'll be black. Okay, so it just needs to know what it's capturing as the sky. This we can change if we want. We can manually override the color here. Let's say if we wanted to have this slightly we can change the intensity scale. So let's say we go 0.1. So now we've got a little bit of light, like a little bit of this purplishy light. Oh, sorry. Maybe I'll turn off the. Sorry, it's very hard. No. These lights are an up-down switch, but they only go fully up or fully down. My goodness, that projector is not great.
Oh, that's very different.
Show up on that.
Yeah, it's very different with the laptop.
Oh, okay.
So if I keep walking over here, oh yeah, that's not showing anything. But you'll see maybe on the sides of this, you get the purple hue. That shows kind of that purplish hueness. On my screen, I can kind of see the outline of objects in the level with a slight purple hue. So that is the skylight. Okay, again, we've got these different settings here. We can change it around whatever way we want it. Probably in most cases, our skylight can be static because we can bake it into the map. Rendering, we can turn off visibility, stuff like that. We can have cloud ambient occlusion so the clouds are going to affect us. All that sort of stuff. The other type of light we'll generally have is a directional light. Okay, and this is going to represent our sun, basically. Did I tell you why this says preview here?
So where the light's going to be?
Yeah, so what that means is basically that texture that you're seeing is a preview texture. So really what it's telling you is if you want to see what this is going to look like in the game, you need to render this out. Okay? So this here at the minute represents our sun, but it's not hooked into the sun itself. Okay, sorry, I've ran a bit over. I'll show just hooking this into the sun, and then we'll take a break, and then in the lab it's very much just going to be working on like building up some lighting for one of the levels we've played so far. So I'm gonna grab the, where is it? Yeah, sorry, this Sky Sphere blueprint. Inside in this, it's going to look for directional light actor. We can use this directional light to represent our sun. And now there's our sun. Oh, sorry, I need to turn on. Atmosphere sunlight here. And now as you move this around, can you see the light in the atmosphere there is kind of changing? Cool. Okay, and we're able to change that stuff. Again, similarly here, our color of this light, like we might want to change this a little bit off a perfect white to something like that. Then we can hit build lighting only. We can press play and we can see what this is going to look like with kind of some of our initial lighting. So we still have our skylight, which is giving us a slight purple ambient everywhere in the level. And then we've got this slightly orangey, let's say early evening sort of light. The worst light generally to use in a game is like midday, where the sun's pointing straight down and it's super bright and everything's blown out. Generally things look a little bit nicer if you go for like a later or earlier in the day where there's a bit of colour in the sunlight and it'll pick up like shadows and texture and stuff. So now if we press play, we got our level. Able to turn on our flashlight. We've got dark and light areas inside here. And our light is working fairly well. And we get like a lot of like natural exposure and stuff like that as well happening in blue. Okay. Any questions on that, folks? There are main lighting types. There's not too much in like the light settings. They're very similar to what we would have done in Unity. It's just to be aware of that thing with the stationary, static, and movable. Okay? Yes? So, folks, one of the things that was mentioned to me is that at the minute, when we go inside here, I jump. Do you notice an issue with the spotlight? Yeah. So, folks, at the minute, the spotlight is following the position of the body, like what way we're oriented, but it's not moving up and down. Does anyone want to guess why that is? Okay, here's our spotlight. Anyone want to guess why it's not tracking the player's head, but instead just what direction their body's pointed? Yeah, so at the minute, this is a child of like the parent game image of the capsule, basically. What we want to do is make this a child of the camera, because the camera tilts up and down. And to do that, very simply, we just click and drag spotlight, put it underneath first person camera, and now if we press play, okay, it's just a simple parenting issue, and now it works. A little bit better, how we might expect it to work. Does anyone know what's happening here? Why I'm losing it when I go directly above me? Yeah, it's kind of to do with, there's a few things affecting it, but let's see if we can we might be able to fix that a little bit. Let's see. There's no simple solution to that. Realistically, I probably have the, oh, actually, yeah, hold on. That's, the position of this is all the way back here. So if I place it like somewhere here, maybe, around the player's head. Actually, I might even want it a bit lower down. Still, all that's happening is basically that it's like clipping through there. Better way to do that. Try to pop it inside there and just see if that makes any difference. It probably won't, to be honest, because yeah, that's working a little bit better. Okay, we have visibility a little bit further. But basically what's really happened there is the roof is just too close to our head, so the light is clipping through it, basically. It's probably slightly, again, this is one of those things, fixing this is a little bit of work, and it's not a huge issue, hopefully. The only reason you'd fix this is if your game relies on this, like to solve maybe level design puzzles or something like that, then you might want to think about how you specifically get this working perfectly. So, where am I? Cool. So we fixed that issue. We've looked at we have our skylight, which is giving us off this like sort of purpley light. That's a little bit hard to see, but it is there. And then we've our directional light, which is doing our kind of bright light and our shadows and stuff like that. We then have the spotlight, which we're using as the player like camera, and then we have used point lights that I control one and again. Actually, you know where we'll put the point lights? Over the keys. So if we go into the key blueprint viewport, we can add component, point light. I'm going to call that W because I always end up doing that. We can try and put this somewhere where we think we're getting nice kind of shadows bouncing off it. One thing we're going to want to do is decrease the radius quite a bit. Maybe a bit bigger than that. We might change the color. Hey, we might want to make this kind of goldy or something like that. Okay, and we're getting that sort of golding type effect there. We can use temperature if we want to use that to change the color, but generally that's like if you're really into lighting, sometimes you're using temperature because bulbs have different temperatures, but it's not. I think in a game engine you're better off pick the color you want. We can turn off cast shadows if we want. Because this is a pickup light, we might want the casting any shadows. And now if we look at our level now, press play. Okay, we can see our keys on the ground much easier. And when we pick them up, it's kind of clear that they're gone from where they were. Okay? So that's the kind of thing we can do with point lights. Again, very similar settings and things like that. With point light, where is it? What type do you think that you want that to be in terms of mobility? If this is a pickup, movable, stationary, or static? What would be the issue if we had a static? Okay, I'm going to set it to static. Going to go into our engine. I'm going to build my lighting. Okay, and people probably know once I said build lighting, you'll understand what the issue will be with this. Yeah, so after I get the pickup, it's going to stay there. Okay, so we'll test this and see. Our lighting's almost built. Now, if we set it as a stationary light, we might run into an issue where if there's multiple stationary lights overlapping, it actually won't render it, because the engine then chooses what to render. So we probably want it to be movable. Because it's not a huge light, it's not moving that much, it's not actually like crazy resource intensive to do that. So now if we press play, here's our baked lighting. We get our pickup, but its light doesn't go away. Okay, and that's the problem with using that. Okay, so we probably want this to be movable, basically. Save. Cool. Okay. Now, this is our entire level, let's say. Okay. Do you think at the moment if we build something out here, is it gonna like create lighting on it and stuff like that? So let's just do it. I'm gonna drag in a cube. Okay, so this is obviously not quite where I was pointing at, but like this is off of the map at the minute that we're talking. Okay, it's still generating lighting. If I put a cone on it, it's generating lighting and shadows and stuff there. Okay. Now, one thing that this is going to do is it's not going to, outside here, when it's generating shadows, it's not going to render those shadows as nice as anything that's inside here. Okay? The reason for that is by default, this little scene that Unreal creates by default, if I click this box surrounding things, see this yellow box that surrounds the entire level? That is called a light mass importance volume. Okay, does anyone want to guess what that does? Yeah. It basically says to the lighting is all gathered by a thing called, I think it's Swarm. It like runs a Swarm agent to like calculate the lighting. And basically anything we put inside this light mass importance volume, it says this is important detail and important area of our game. Anything outside of it, it's like you can use lower quality lights and shadows and stuff. Okay? So it'll put extra detail and extra quality into areas inside the box, lower detail, lower quality outside of that box. Okay? Let's say if I place this like something like, I don't know, like this. Okay, that's pretty much going halfway across the key there. Switch back to perspective. And now I'm going to build lighting. And we might see a slight difference there. Because it's quite a small area, it's probably going to be like fairly okay building this. But we might see a slight difference in the quality of light map resolution we get. As you work through levels in Unreal, I would recommend building your lighting a bit. I let students like build big levels and then they only build their lighting towards the end, and like the light is breaking through scenes and models and stuff like that. So you kind of want to do this do this a bit, or like maps don't line up and stuff. So let's see. Okay. It's going across to here, isn't it? So yeah, can you see there, like the lighting shadows there, just a bit more jaggy than if I come over here. We've got slightly smoother lighting. Okay, it's a tiny difference, and it probably doesn't make much of a difference. One of the reasons it's not making much of a difference as well is while we're working in the editor, lighting quality, okay, is by default set to preview. When we're building out our final game, we should set it to production. Okay, I'm going to do that. And now if I build lighting, this is going to take quite a bit longer. You can see even the status of setting up like the swarm rendering and stuff like that is going to take a while. It's a small level, it might take too long, but could take a while, but we'll see how it goes. And so what we want to do really is make sure we're using like preview lighting, especially early on in development as we're testing out our level and trying things out. Once we get to more production and finished quality work, we might increase the lighting quality because we're going to be moving the design of our level a lot less. Okay, so we'll want our lighting to be pretty accurate. I would say generally it's quite important, like lighting, especially for your level, like your final level, we're going to focus on like white box and like block mesh. Lighting becomes really important if there's not much more there, if there's not like lots of beautiful textures and stuff like that. And while like in your block mesh you might use some textures, relying on lighting will actually help quite a lot as well. You know, like as I think Jeff mentioned, like using lighting to guide the player to areas, you know, if you want them to walk down a corridor. So let's press play here and see what this looks like. So you can see there even it's given like, can you see the way it's done the lighting in the corner there? Okay, and we'll probably see not a huge difference in quality in terms of these. But yeah, you can see there's a difference definitely in the time it takes. And once you get into high detail models, the time it takes like increases hugely. Okay? When you're making your levels, initially, I would say design, go out of lit mode and go into unlit mode. And you might want, you might even go in for like, let's say brush wireframe or something like that at times to see like where objects are in your game, and you'll be like, oh yeah, looking at that sort of stuff. Okay, so using the different modes while you're building out your level is quite important, that you're not just looking at it with like the lit mode. If you are working in lit mode, it's totally fine to you know, just if you click somewhere and press L, so if you hold down L on the keyboard and you click somewhere, it's going to create like a point light for you. And if you're doing level design, that's sometimes useful, that you're like, oh, I can't quite see how this corner is lining up, so you can just hold down L, click, and it will generate a light for you. Okay. Generally, you're going to want to delete those, but they're useful when you're like designing levels to get things like that. Are there any questions on that, folks? That's the basics of lighting on Unreal. I'll link you to, there's an Unreal Learning like lighting course that's about an hour and a half. It goes into a little bit more detail, especially about like doing like kind of high-end renders and stuff like that if you want to get like really high-end graphics. But 90% of what we'll be doing, especially in level design, is kind of on these tools of using, 9 times out of 10, you're either using a point light or a directional light. And like 8 times out of those 9, you're actually using a point light almost always. Okay. A couple of things to remember with a point light. By default, I'll just create one here. Remember, try and change your default color a little, just to get it. You mightn't see it too much here, but just to get it off that pure white color, it's quite useful. And then also, generally the radius of them is quite big by default, so you might want to bring in that radius a bit. And as you do that, you might want to change the intensity a little bit too, okay? So, changing things so that each light has its own properties and behaviors and looks like light for the space it's in is kind of quite an important thing to do as well. Okay? Any questions on that, folks? Cool. So, that is pretty much everything we need to know about lighting. Like everything that's really important about lighting or useful that we're going to use for the rest of the module. I'll link to the Unreal Learning course in case anyone wants to take lighting a bit further and like to see a bit more about it. But most of the time, yeah, that's what you're doing. If you can use point lights well and kind of make sure you're changing their values so that they suit what you're doing. If this is like level, like this is just a light that's hanging up somewhere in my level, it should just be set to static. Okay, instead of leaving it at stationary. If you leave it at stationary, you're going to have an issue where like your upstairs lights are overlapping with downstairs lights and it'll stop rendering some of them just because it's going to prioritize which stationary light to use or not. If you need lots of lights overlapping and stuff and you need them to be dynamic, then you might want to set them to be movable as well. Okay. Any questions on that, folks? Cool. With this, one of the key things you're trying to do with your lights is generate mood. So the level design, when you're doing your initial block mesh, what you're trying to do is create the space and kind of make it feel the right scale and stuff like that. But the next step then is like your lighting really brings in the mood. If you make things quite dark, it'll have quite a menacing feel to it. If you make things quite bright, it'll feel a little bit happier and more open and stuff like that. Okay? Bear in mind things like putting lights, let's say having a dark area and a light off a door from that area, and the light then can seep out into the hall and stuff like that. You can create really nice effects with lights. It really helps like capture the player's attention and try and draw them to the next area. And it's like, oh, what's that down there? And they'll move towards it. I don't know if Jeff mentioned this, but one thing to do with lights is that like often what level designers will do is you'll light the critical path, you'll light where you want the player to go, and then you will hide like secrets or collectibles or rewards in kind of dark areas where players will go and explore. Does that make sense? So you'll light the steps of the stairs, and then behind the stairs you'll have that's where it's dark, you'll have a chest or something like that hidden in your level that rewards the player. Does that make sense? So you're kind of rewarding exploration of the dark while also highlighting to players who just want to follow the critical path that like, okay, I should go this way, I should follow the light places. Any questions? You all good? Cool. So that's basically it. All I want you to do really with this is to like over the next week take the other way you took a level a couple of weeks ago and you kind of themed it in your own form, like it was the space we had created from imagining what inside somewhere was. Just go through that level and try and add lights and customize lights and get it to feel like something. You know, if you create a sci-fi space and you want to make it feel a bit like Dead Space or something like that, try and use your lights to create that sense of like that it's not that nice or that it's dark or that it's gloomy. Things you can do as well with the lights is let's say we have our flashlight here and we have it like turning on, toggling on and off. You could also create a script that uses, you know, the timeline, the way we use the timeline to open the door and close the door as an animation. You could use that to change the intensity of the light from 0 to its maximum, and then it's going to alternate up and down, so you get like a flickery light effect and stuff like that. And you can add in like randomly, you can add in noise to change that effect as well, to give flickering, kind of different feeling to the flickering light. Okay, so any of that stuff you want to do and playing around with blueprints, I encourage you to do it to kind of get a feel for kind of customizing the way the light works in your space. Okay. Any other questions, folks? No? That's gonna be us. I'm gonna turn off OBS.